Hi, I'm Bob Dover, and thanks for watching Module 4 here of the series on stream restoration in Suburbia with some case studies from Columbia, Maryland. Reminder of some key points from Module 3. So we're looking at Elkhorn Branch, and where a stream restoration project was proposed a couple of years ago. It ended up not being done, but there's still people trying to move it forward. So Module 3, we showed that many of the claims of the supporters of the project uh, were not true. The project wouldn't have improved water quality in the Chesapeake Bay. It wouldn't have reduced erosion. It wouldn't have reduced dredging needs in Lake Elkhorn. The proponents of that project failed to present any scientific studies more recent than 2008 to support their claims of the benefits of this project. And and there are plenty of scientific studies they could have cited that they just ignored. We showed that the primary cause of increased erosion in Elkhorn Branch is elevated runoff coming from these uncontrolled stormwater outfalls that are in the adjacent commercial and residential developments. And if we implemented best management practices at those upstream locations, we could substantially reduce the concentrated runoff and therefore reduce the erosion in Elkhorn Branch without having to cut down acres and acres of trees. The objectives of the stream restoration project depend on which organization you're looking at. Now, the developer who was proposing it wanted to generate saleable wetland mitigation credits that they could sell to real estate developers in other parts of Columbia. So they had a purely financial interest in doing this. It was literally just a development intended to make money for them. For the Columbia Association, which owns the land, they claimed that their only objective was to reduce future dredging costs and impacts to residents due to dredging on Lake Elkhorn. And for the Maryland Department of the Environment and the Army Corps of Engineers, the reason they have stream restoration programs at all is supposedly to reduce delivery of sediment and nutrients to the Chesapeake Bay so we can hopefully improve ecological conditions in the Chesapeake Bay. Well, the purpose of this module is to show if any of these objectives would have been met. Would wetlands have been created? Would dredging volumes have been reduced? And would water quality and ecological function in the Chesapeake Bay actually have been improved? So let's look at Lake Elkhorn. The Columbia Association operates three good-sized lakes, and they're different, and the differences are really important here. Two of them were constructed in 1966 before the Clean Water Act was passed. Lake Elkhorn was constructed in 1974 after the Clean Water Act has passed. And because the Clean Water Act implemented standards for how to construct these lakes to improve water quality and improve ecological conditions, Lake Elkhorn was designed and constructed in accordance with these relatively modern standards. And the other lakes were not. They were constructed beforehand. Now, one of those had some work done after it was constructed to try to bring it up to standard, but it's still not quite there. But Lake Elkhorn, the main issue we're talking about this standard is Clean Water Act required that there be a 4-bay settling pond attached to these on the front end, on the upstream end, so that you would capture the sediment and the nutrients and any pollutants in a relatively small area. It would settle out, and it could be easily dredged from there because it's in a limited area. And then the relatively cleaner water would be released to the main body of the lake after passing through a small dam or weir. And so Lake Elkhorn was constructed like that. And so here are some photos of it, of the 4-bay settling pond at Lake Elkhorn. So this isn't the lake itself. This is the little forebay settling pond on the upper end where Elkhorn Branch comes in. So you can see from here, there's across the way, there's a sediment delta from where Elkhorn Branch enters. And on the opposite side, there's a weir that separates the forebay from the wetland and the lake. So we're going to be going and taking a field trip to a couple of these spots. And then this is looking the other way, going to the weir and looking back towards the forebay settling pond. So in this view, the lake is to our back. So this means that Elkhorn Branch and Lake Elkhorn function as a four-stage stormwater treatment system. Stage one is the forebay settling pond itself, where Elkhorn Branch enters, and most of the sediment settles out. Stage two is a wetland that's part of something like a 60 or 70 acre mapped wetlands area. And wetlands remove nutrients from groundwater and surface water. And so they effectively improve water quality as it's passing through the wetlands. So that's stage two. And then the water passes under a bridge and enters the main body of Lake Elkhorn. And there, more sediment settling takes place. And that's stage three. And then at the downstream end, there's a dam. And then below the dam, there's something called a tailwater basin. And there's even more settling that occurs in that little basin before the water is released off to the Little Patuxent River. So it's a fairly sophisticated stormwater treatment system in place here at Lake Elkhorn. Now, last summer in 2024, some residents, so the Columbia Association had to repair the dam. And in order to do so, they lowered the water level in the lake a few feet, which is fine. And what it did is it exposed these little piles of sediment in 6 or 7 or 8 spots around the circumference of the lake. And these were exposed, and they're, as you can see from the photos, they're kind of unsightly, and they attracted attention, and residents reported them to CA. And because residents were aware that there had been a stream restoration project proposed in Elkhorn Branch, some of them jumped to the conclusion, apparently, that if the stream restoration project had been done in Elkhorn Branch, then we wouldn't have the problem with these piles of sediment around the circumference of the lake. And that's simply not true, as we'll see on the field trip. But there are several of them at these uncontrolled storm sewer outfalls, and this is just photos of 3 of them there. So if you look at the entire circumference of the lake, I've marked 6 of them, A through F, where basically an uncontrolled storm drain in the residential developments north or south of the lake are basically funneled, concentrating stormwater flow and discharged from a storm sewer outfall right on the edge of the lake. And so, of course, you're going to build up sediment right at those locations. But that sediment has nothing to do with Elkhorn Branch. Some of these locations are a mile from Elkhorn Branch. And doing a stream restoration project or not doing a stream restoration project in Elkhorn Branch would have had nothing to do with these. But some individuals who apparently want to do stream restoration projects for other reasons have glommed onto this idea that if we did a project, we could reduce dredging costs, and therefore these sediment piles would have been resolved if we had done the stream restoration project, and that's simply not true. Another issue that's gone on in Lake Elkhorn is algal blooms in the summer, and there was one of these in 2024, and it happened in all 3 of Columbia Association's larger lakes, and in some of their smaller ponds as well. And you can see the photo here of Lake Elkhorn, and it looks terrible, and it's due to pollutants, nutrients, elevated nitrogen and phosphorus in the lake, creating these algal blooms. What was interesting, and I took these two photos literally about 5 minutes apart, is that the forebay on that day had no algae on it, but the lake was covered with algae for a period of weeks. Well, what that shows me is that the forebay pond really has no substantially elevated concentrations of nitrogen and phosphorus coming into it from Elkhorn Branch. But the lake does. And so where's it coming from if it's not coming from Elkhorn Branch? Well, it's coming from those uncontrolled storm sewer outfalls, both north and south of the lake. So the conclusions are from Module 1, we discussed how stream restorations do not stabilize streams as is claimed, especially if you don't control the upstream runoff volumes. Module 2 showed the details, the post-construction monitoring results and survey results from the Longfellow project in Columbia, and it showed they're having substantial challenges reforesting the area. There's substantial evidence of instability to the point where they're having to do basically a stream bank failure repair project now, only 4 or 5 years after construction has been completed. So that sounds like a failure if you have to go back and repair eroded stream banks, then that sounds like a problem. In Module 3, we looked at Elkhorn Branch, just the stream itself, and we found multiple areas where you could control runoff volumes, reduce runoff volumes, which would end up reducing erosion in the stream itself. And these are missed opportunities. And you could do these without the need for a destructive stream restoration project. And now here in Module 4, what we've seen is even if erosion in Elkhorn Branch were reduced, it would have no effect on dredging volumes or costs or impacts in the main body of Elkhorn, Lake Elkhorn. The sediment simply doesn't get to Lake Elkhorn. There's really no connection, no direct connection between Elkhorn Branch and Lake Elkhorn. If you did reduce erosion in Elkhorn Branch, it would reduce dredging volumes in the forebay, but the costs and residential impacts of that dredging are a tiny fraction of what would be needed for the entire lake. So people who claim that we're trying to reduce dredging in the main body of the lake, that simply it's a gross exaggeration of what really occurs there. And then it also points out that a project in Elkhorn Branch would not contribute in any substantial way to reducing the delivery of sediment or nutrients to the Chesapeake Bay. So here's the plan for the field trip. We're going to go to the forebay, view it from 2 angles from spot 4 and 5. And then we're going to walk along the southern shore of the lake to see some of these sediment piles that are directly associated with the uncontrolled storm sewer outfalls. So thanks for watching.
Hi, I'm Bob Dover again, and thanks for watching Module 4 of the Stream Restoration in Suburbia series here. We're talking about the downstream end of Elkhorn Branch, where it empties into a pond near Lake Elkhorn. And what you see in front of you, it's called a forebay pond. And as I mentioned in the PowerPoint slide portion of this module, it was constructed after the Clean Water Act was passed. So it was constructed in compliance with modern stormwater regulations, which require things like a forebay pond on lakes and reservoirs. And the reason it requires those is to create a small isolated area where the sediment will accumulate before the water enters the main body of the lake or reservoir. And that makes it limits the spread of the sediment and associated pollutants, and it makes it easier to come dredge it. You know, once if the sediment builds up in a tiny restricted area, it's easier and cheaper to remove than if it's spread out across a large lake. So what you see in front of you, we're at field trip spot number 4, is we're at one end of the forebay pond, and I don't know if you can see On that far end, it's where Elkhorn Branch, the stream itself, enters the forebay pond, and there's a pile of sediment there. You may be able to see the heron sitting on that pile of sediment looking for lunch. And that's where, when there's erosion in Elkhorn Branch, the sediment gets trapped right there. And then on the farther end is where we're going to walk next, where the opening gap in the trees is. And there's a little dam there. It's more of a weir, but it's serviceable, and it creates this as a still water reservoir so it can trap sediment. So one of the major arguments that the Columbia Association had for doing stream restoration project, it was really their only argument, was to reduce dredging costs and dredging impacts in Lake Elkhorn. Well, that's because when they first built Lake Elkhorn, they didn't dredge it for the first 38 years, I think. And yes, the sediment left this forebay pond and went down to the main part of the lake. But since then, CA has changed their policy. They've developed a sediment management plan, as they should, and it calls for dredging something like every 6 to 8 years in limited areas, what they call hotspots, which makes sense. And this is the main hotspot. This is where the main stream enters a still body of water and dumps its sediment. And so they last did dredging here, I believe, in 2021 or 2022. And they really only dredged, they didn't even dredge this entire forebay. They only dredged about a third of it down at the far end. But if you do that on a regular schedule, then the costs each time are reduced. You know, it's a limited mobilization for the contractor, and the costs are reduced. So we're going to walk down to the other end and see the same pond from the other end. All right, now we're at the other end of the forebay pond, what's on the map as field trip spot 5. And you can see over here, that's a little dam. It's not fancy, but it does the job of separating the forebay pond waters from those of Lake Elkhorn, and which is still a half mile further on from here. So the forebay pond is really not directly attached to Lake Elkhorn, and that's something that the people who wanted to do the stream restoration project didn't like to hear, because they wanted to use conditions in Lake Elkhorn to justify doing the stream restoration. And it turns out that the stream and the lake really aren't linked. And then we can see over here, back to the same pile of sediment that comes out of the mouth of Elkhorn Branch, again with the heron on it. And it's just a different view looking back towards stop 4 where we just were. So we'll move from here on down to the wetland that separates the forebay pond from the lake. Okay, I really didn't give this a field trip number. We're sort of between spots 5 and 6. I just wanted to show this expansive wetland that is downstream of the forebay pond, which the purpose of the Elkhorn Branch project was to create wetlands. Well, this area is part of, I think, more than 70 acres of mapped wetlands that the water flows through before it reaches Lake Elkhorn. So over here you can see that stream continues to flow from the forebay, and then below the bridge down here it enters Lake Elkhorn. And so again, this idea that there's a connection between Elkhorn Branch and Lake Elkhorn is not entirely correct. There is a connection, but it's a remote connection. It's not direct. And so there's not as great a link between erosion in Elkhorn Branch and dredging in Lake Elkhorn. So we'll move on down and look at some of these piles of sediment in Lake Elkhorn coming out of these uncontrolled stormwater outfalls. Okay, we're at field trip spot number 6. And so what I mentioned in the PowerPoint presentation, what happened last August, was that the level of the lake had been lowered and it exposed these piles of sediment around the lake, 7 or 8 of them. And we'll take a look at one of them here. But the idea, you can see the sort of lighter orange spot in the lake. That's a shallow area where that is the outfall that comes from the neighborhood up the hill. And it's these uncontrolled storm drains and uncontrolled outfalls of those storm drains that are depositing these little deltas of sediment into the lake, and they're contributing, because they're uncontrolled, they're contributing pollutants to the lake. And it was these little deltas that some people who are in favor of the stream restoration tried to claim were evidence of why we had to do a stream restoration in Elkhorn Branch. Well, we're a mile from Elkhorn Branch, and this little delta has nothing to do with Elkhorn Branch, and no matter what had been done or would ever be done in Elkhorn Branch has nothing to do with these little piles of sediment. So you just need to be careful when you hear people trying to justify doing these big projects and using whatever looks bad as trying to say, oh, you see, why we have to do this. This is an example of how that information is misused. So that's the end of Module 4, and I appreciate you watching through the end of it. I hope we go watch some of the other modules.